Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. I don't know what to call him, Major Father Halladay. I cut my fingers on his creases, because there's a sharp. Anyways, I got the good conduct medal when I was in the service. I didn't know all of the different ones that he has on. He's got a whole bunch of ribbons, and it's a real pleasure to have him here to talk to you about his involvement with the military, his worldwide ethics, etc. So I'll let him give you all the specifics, but we're welcoming him here. Please come on. Also an opportunity to share your enthusiasm for the guys that put their and gals who put their places on the line for all of us. And we're fortunate enough to be able to sit here while others are sacrificing much more so.
Hey, good morning, Sarah. How are you? It's great to be with you guys again. So many times I've come to this city of Nashville to be with Sarahs and to be with the great groups that promote vocations within the church. And so it's a great honor and privilege to be with y'all again here in this great city of Nashville and the Nashville Sarahs that I've come to know and love so well. And when we first started out years ago, you remember, Lloyd, when we first started out years ago, I had no idea where this journey was going to take us, which is usually the way things work with the Lord, right? But when we first started out, I was assigned to Fort Campbell up there in Clarksville. Got to know the Sarahs down here, and eventually my brother becomes a seminarian and becomes a priest for Nashville. So our lives have intersected in so many great ways that only Christ himself could have foreseen. And so it's, like I said, it's a great privilege, honor, grace, blessing to be with y'all again in this great city and at this international convention. So I was praying a lot and asking the Lord, hey, Lord, what do you want me to tell them about military chaplaincy? What do they need to hear from me and from you, through me, about military chaplaincy? And so what I'm about to give to you today is really a fruit of that prayer and openness, please God, to grace and His Holy Spirit about what we do as chaplains and why we do it. So just to kind of give us a short little history lesson, history's a great little pastime of mine, so I like to connect things a lot of times with history. But one of the first, just by the way, before we get started there, just want to say 2 great feast days to be here in Nashville. The Feast of St. Peter and Paul yesterday, my patron. Feast of the First Martyrs of Rome today. So great feast days that we've got going on. But those men and women laid the foundation for Christianity to begin to proliferate throughout at least the known world at that time, the Mediterranean world of the Roman Empire. The chaplaincy really begins, interesting enough, with St. Martin of Tours. Now, St. Martin was born in 316. So St. Martin's born the year after Constantine issues the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan 315 makes Christianity legal throughout the Roman Empire. And from that point on, pretty much Christianity begins to proliferate and ultimately takes its place as the religion of the Roman Empire. It supplants the old pagan religions and takes its place as the religion of the Roman Empire. And so St. Martin of Tours is actually growing up in those early days of the freedom of Christianity within the Roman Empire. And everybody probably knows the story of St. Martin, where he meets a beggar on the road and he takes his cloak and he splits it in half and he gives it to the beggar, and then he realizes that the beggar was actually Christ himself. All right, well, that mantle, that cloak that gets divided and given to this beggar who turns out to be the Lord, it gets taken as a holy relic and placed in the church of Saint Denis in France, and it's kept there as a relic. It's called a capa in Latin. It was called a capa, the mantle. And so those who took care of the capa, the holy relic of St. Martin of Tours, were known as the capellani. And then the place that the relic resided, when the Frankish kings would take it out to war because they felt like having a holy relic would ensure them victory, the place where the Kappa resided with the Capellani was called the chapel. And so that's where you start to get the words chaplain, chapel, and chaplaincy. It's from that association with St. Martin of Tours. And so that connection going all the way now up to the American Revolution. Chaplains have been involved in militaries all around the world and throughout history ever since certainly that time of St. Martin of Tours. But with the chaplaincy in the United States and our Army, it was established July the 29th, 1775. That's when the chaplaincy was originally established for the United States Army. The Army itself was established June 14th, 1775. So what had been known as the Massachusetts or the New England Observance, the Continental Congress now renames the Continental Army, and it's established June the 14th, 1775, with the chaplaincy following soon after established. So we're 243 years old this year. 243 years old. So it's great to be a part of that lineage, both the ancient lineage that comes from St. Martin of Tours and the lineage that comes from the defense of this nation ever since the Revolutionary War. And our job at the beginning of our country has never changed. It has always been to be in support, in religious support, to those who protect and defend this country and its Constitution. That's what we have always been entrusted with doing. And so the job of military chaplains today is exactly the same. But it's interesting because in my first assignment with the 1st to 506, and I was just talking to a gentleman a moment ago about the 1st to 506. You may have remembered a few years ago, HBO did a great series called The Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers was about the 1st to 506. That's who it was. And so this actually became my first unit whenever I entered into the Army as a chaplain. When I entered into the Army and I signed into this unit, we did not have a designation yet. The Army was standing up. This is in the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Army is standing up brigades, and they don't do that every day, but they're standing up brigades, and brigades without designations. They don't even have designations yet. And while we were there, we received the designation of the 506, brought the colors back from Korea, where they were, because the 506 had migrated to Korea, and so it was being there, situated there. The colors were taken back from Korea, brought back to Fort Campbell, and reestablished with the 101st, which is what they were originally constituted with, the 101st. And I was, at that time, the chaplain of the 4th BCT, 4th Brigade Combat Team, that became the 1st Battalion of the 506th. And so, again, a great moment of history. Being a history buff, of course, you can see all those things coming together. I really felt proud to be a part of that organization. And we did some wonderful, wonderful things out in Ramadi in Iraq in the days in which the 506 went back to work for this country in a powerful way. But this job of taking care of soldiers, it's funny because I was a first lieutenant when I first got started with the 506. And you don't see many first lieutenants as chaplains. They're usually captains. So everybody's looking at me and they're thinking, first lieutenant, man, this guy sure, is he really that young? And I wasn't. I was 40 years old when I started in the Army. I was like, oh my goodness. I said, 40 years old as a first lieutenant. You just don't see that kind of stuff. But I got penned as captain while I was with the 506. I was 6 months a first lieutenant and then was promoted to captain. And it was, I remember the day because my battalion commander was standing, he had me in front of the whole unit, the whole battalion. And he says to the battalion, he says, gentlemen, do you know who you call when things get really, really bad. So, of course, they're all sitting out there. They know I'm about to be pinned, promoted to chaplain. So they all just kind of begin to say, "The chaplain." And he says, "No. You call the medic." He says, "Who do you call when things get really, 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 really bad?" They all go, "The chaplain." He says, "Yeah, right, the chaplain." And that's what we do. I mean, so oftentimes we're associated with those moments where soldiers have just kind of reached their last limit. You know, they've kind of reached that place where they need something more than science or mere medicine can supply to them. They need hope. That's what they need. They need a reason to keep going. So many times they have been in places where they have seen their friends killed right next to them. Right next to them. And I just can't tell you what it does to an individual to see someone who you fought with, who you trained with, who you spent a significant portion of your life with, probably even went to basic training with this person next to you. And then to see their life end, and you begin to rack your brain with the questions of why him and not me? And that whole survivor's guilt becomes that we hear about all the time. But when it gets into you, when the jaws of that nasty little critter clamp down on you, that's when you start to really understand what that's about, the survivor's guilt and what's going on there. And so many times I've talked to soldiers about that very thing. So many times I've talked to soldiers about having to kill someone and about what that does to them the first time they actually have to do that. They are actually in a firefight where they know they've taken a life, and what that does to you. And so I'll offer you those little pieces of the drama, the tension, the difficulty of what it means to be both a soldier and the chaplain who takes care of them, precisely to say this, is that men and women today, just like Bob was saying at the very beginning, men and women today are on the line for us. So we can do exactly what we're doing right now. That we can come together peacefully, celebrate our faith, talk about the vocations of men who hopefully will become priests, of women who will become sisters, of men who will become brothers and deacons. We can talk about the promotion of those things because we have men and women who are out there on the lines for us, keep things safe and secure. That's why priests like me, men like me who listen to a call from the Lord to go and help these soldiers is so desperately needed. One of the things, so the way it works within the military, so I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Mobile, Alabama. That's my home diocese. So Archbishop Lipscomb, who was the Archbishop for Mobile whenever I was ordained a priest, gave me permission to go to the Army, but the transaction that happens is that my diocese loans me to the Archdiocese for Military Services, which is the ecclesial diocese for all priests that work for the military, and it also has the care of all the souls of active duty military soldiers, well, not just soldiers, active duty military service members, their families, and then any of our National Guard and Reserve that are also mobilized and activated. And then they also have the care of the souls of all those that are in the State Department and are overseas. So that's what the Archdiocese of Military Services does. And that's the transaction that happens with priests. So the Archdiocese of Military Services, unlike other dioceses, does not ordain priests for itself. It only receives priests that are loaned to it by dioceses and religious orders. Now, let that sink in for just a moment. We all know the vocation crisis within the church. We all know that bishops in just about every diocese of the United States has more parishes than he has priests to take care of them. If the only way the Archdiocese of Military Services receives priests is when bishops loan them to it, do you think there's a great river of priests that are flowing into the Archdiocese of Military Services? Not so much. Not so much. And it's understandable. It really is understandable. And Archbishop Broglio has worked, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Military Services has worked tirelessly with bishops. In fact, I just saw his YouTube video at the USCCB at their past meeting in Baltimore, where he once again stands up in front of the bishops of the United States and he implores them to send priests to the military to care for your Catholics that are serving in the military. Because while they're in the military, yes, they do belong to the Archdiocese of Military Services, but again, in a way that's unique to that diocese, they don't stay in the Archdiocese of Military Services. They will retire or they will finish their service with the military and they will go back to dioceses or to other dioceses. How they come back in terms of their Catholic formation, their Catholic piety, the level of devotion, how they return to civilian life as Catholics depends on how robust and how faithful we are at taking care of them while they're in the military. And that requires priests. That requires priests to say Mass. It requires priests to hear confessions. It requires priests to run CCD programs, RCIA programs, all the faith formation that takes place in any civilian parish that you belong to. We have to do those things for our military members as well. And do not kid yourself. And I don't want this to become an us-them kind of talk, but do not kid yourself. What proliferates in the chaplaincy for the military, regardless of the service, Army, Navy, Air Force, doesn't matter. What proliferates in the military, where you do have a great number of chaplains, is from any of the thousands of different Protestant denominations that are in the military. If a service member is looking for hope, if they have reached those limits, if they are struggling to hang on, and they are Catholic, perhaps only minimally formed in their Catholic life, perhaps only receiving the basic of catechesis when they were growing up. My goodness, they're 18, 19 years old. They come in as enlisted guys and girls anyway. If they've only received that minimum, and the person who's there to scoop them up is a Protestant chaplain, it's understandable their devotion is going to go towards that person who is there to help them in their deepest, darkest hour. But we lose a Catholic who could have been as faithful and as alive and as loving of the Lord as he or she has now become a Protestant faithful Christian. And quite frankly, they will never know Christ as deeply and as profoundly as a Protestant as they will as a Catholic. It just doesn't happen. The channels, the understanding of revelation just isn't there in its fullness to be able to allow the person to understand their relationship with Christ the way that they can as a Catholic. And so in the military, where every last single day you can be brought to a place where you're either going to visit despair or you're going to hang on to hope. You're either going to know great tribulation interiorly, spiritually, or you're going to know incredible spiritual resiliency. We need to have priests who are there to help those Catholic men and women to be able to be that robust, faithful, alive Catholic that we know lays asleep within them many times and is simply looking for that person there to wake it up, to make it come alive, to breathe into the embers that are there and to bring it into the bonfire that it can be within the soul. And that's what we did. That's what chaplains do. We tend the fires of faith that sometimes have dimmed in our service members for any number of reasons, and for a lot of the same reasons that oftentimes happen even in the civilian life. We're there with them, in very particular moments. I had a buddy of mine from the chaplaincy. He used to love to say, when the soldiers are cold, we're cold. When they're hungry, we're hungry. When they sleep on the ground, we're sleeping on the ground too. And that's what chaplains do. We identify with the hardships, difficulties of what it means to be selfless in your service to this country. We identify with those same hardships and difficulties with our soldiers precisely to form that bond and to then be able to speak to them about the things that ultimately matter. Their belief in God, their understanding of how God loves them, and to be able to make sense of that in some quite honestly insane situations. Chaplain, how does God love me? Or how does God show His love for us when we're shooting at one another? When my buddy just died? When the only thing I see around me is death and destruction? How does that speak of God's love? To make sense out of those things is what we have to do for our service members. Precisely to build that spiritual resilience that they need to be soldiers, certainly, but to be faithful Catholic men and women, especially. And so, the chaplaincy becomes very important for us, I think, as a nation. Not just to take care of our soldiers and what they have to do to protect and defend us. That is certainly true, and that usually becomes immediately to mind whenever you think of the chaplaincy. But to also make sure that the faith that these men and women have is a faith that can benefit all of us once they leave the military, once they come back to civilian life, that they become practicing members of their parishes when they return, to help make those parishes the lively places of faith and Christian Catholic formation that they need to be. Because these men and women, I'll tell you something, if they learn anything, they learn this. As soon as you get to a place, you dive in and you make it happen. You don't rest on your... That's one of the great things about military life. Every place I've ever gone to, we call it PCS, Permanent Change of Station. When every place I've ever PCS, you never have a problem with Catholics volunteering for the Catholic Chapel. That's in their military DNA. It's what they do. Because they realize, hey, this is for all of us. It's for my family and for everybody else's family too. And if we don't do it, it won't get done. And that just becomes a military mentality that they cultivate and develop as being a part of these great organizations that defend, protect, and defend our country. So it naturally manifests itself in something around a chapel life. But they take that very same mentality, that very same vigor in them, and they take it and back to the civilian parishes once they get out of the military. To do exactly that, to make them robust, powerful, beautiful places to be a part of that continued faith formation. Not just for their families, but for every family that's involved. So that's military chaplaincy for you. That's what it does for us. The next thing I wanted to kind of move into and to talk to you about are these efforts that are happening within the military, within the Archdiocese military services, to help promote vocations. And perhaps maybe certainly something you can pray about, but maybe something SERRA can even be involved in a little bit more robustly. I'll leave it to you to try to figure out how those things can be done. But one of the things that we have is our co-sponsorship program in the Archdiocese military services, where a young man, and we're particularly talking about young men here because we're talking about priests, right? And I wish we had a place for religious sisters. I've even thought about that. Religious sisters in the be chaplain assistants, if nothing else. If it wasn't for the fact they had to carry a weapon. I got a story about that in just a moment. If it wasn't for the fact that they have to carry a weapon, I think we could probably do something there. Maybe the deacons too, for that matter. But the co-sponsorship program is for a young man who realizes that he would like to be a chaplain as a priest. Realizes he would like to be a military chaplain as a priest. And so he can approach the vocation director, let's say, for instance, of the Archdiocese of Military Services, and say, Father, I've really discerned a call to military chaplaincy, but I'm not sure how to do this. I'm a diocesan seminarian. Well, that's where our vocation director will then speak to our bishop, Archbishop Broglio, and then from bishop to bishop, they'll talk about the possibility of the Archdiocese of Military Services paying for a part of the education of the seminarian in agreement for a certain amount of time of military chaplaincy duty, and then the civilian diocese would pay for the other part of his education. So that co-sponsorship program has really taken off. Oftentimes, however, the young man needs to have heard that call, or at least identified that he would like to be a chaplain prior to becoming a seminarian for a civilian diocese. Because once he becomes a seminarian for a civilian diocese, it does become a little bit more difficult to kind of convince the bishop, hey, why don't you let go in a few years? Well, he's counting on him to take care of the next parish as soon as he's ordained. That's a tough sell for a bishop. So it does depend on his being open to, or his recognizing that call even before he goes to a civilian diocese, and then approaching the Archdiocese of Military Services. And oftentimes at that point we can hook them up with a diocese, particularly if they come from a military family, and let's say they've moved around a lot, and he doesn't have any kind of affinity to one particular diocese, right, because of the many places they live as a result of military service. Then we can put them together with a diocese that would be open to something like co-sponsorship, and then he goes on and becomes a chaplain, at least for a period of time, if not for the whole 20 years as a career. So that co-sponsorship program is very important for us. Of course, there's still the traditional way of receiving chaplains, just having them loaned from dioceses and religious orders that come to us. But those are two really the biggest primary ways that we receive chaplains to help take care of our military men and women for all those reasons that I've just explained to you. But unfortunately, well, I'll put this out to you as an audience participation question. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to how many, and I can give you numbers for the Army right now. They're equally as severe for Navy and Air Force, but I just don't know those numbers. But any of you want to hazard a guess as to how many active duty Army chaplains we have in the Army today as I speak to you? 3? It's a little bit higher than 3. Oh, let me tell you this though. We have 550,000 soldiers throughout the year. 25% of those are Catholic. Catholics are the largest single religious denomination in the military. It's the largest single religious denomination. Now, one thing you gotta be careful of, Protestants like to lump their numbers together and call themselves Protestant. There's no such religion as Protestant. There are individual Protestant denominations and individual Protestant religions, but there is no religion called Protestant that is analogous to Catholic. So Catholics become the single largest religious denomination in the military, and in the Army we're 25%. It's about the same thing for the Navy, a little bit less for the Air Force. How many chaplains do you think we have active duty to take care of that 25% of 550? How many? 40? It's a good guess.
125.
We have 85 active duty chaplains. 85 active duty chaplains. That's it. That's it. And when the Army was at a much higher number than it is now, back when we saw the biggest numbers during Iraq and Afghanistan, we only had 160. 160. So the Archdiocese of the Military Services overall is 1.2 million Catholics. 1.2 million Catholics. Like I said, the Air Force and the Navy don't post numbers any better than the Army when it comes to the number of chaplains that we have. And of course, that's not even given the consideration of the geographical particularities of the Archdiocese of Military Services. So our chapels span the globe. Our parishes are on almost every continent. Antarctica may be the only place we don't have a chaplain. on almost every continent of the world, and in so many different countries, and most oftentimes in places of conflict and social unrest. So geographically, we're far different than the normal confines of a diocese. But we have, for the Army, 85 men that are active duty to take care of our service members, our soldiers. And I should say service members, because at Fort Gordon, where I'm assigned right now, I take care of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and even some Coast Guard personnel. The work that Fort Gordon particularly does is cyber and signal. Right? So all of your IT stuff, I got all the IT guys. If I need a computer fix, I know right where to go. I got it. I've been teaching them ethics for the last 3 years. And there, by the way, there is really a category called ethical hacking. There really is. But, so that's what Fort Gordon does. We're cyber and signal. And so because of that, because this has become kind of the niche of Fort Gordon, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Marines, they send a lot of their personnel to be trained at Fort Gordon in both IT, cyber, and signal communications efforts. So they developed them as these cyber and signal service members. So in Mass, any given Sunday or Saturday evening, I can have all the service members represented. It doesn't matter what branch they belong to. And that's a beautiful thing. I really love that. I love that about the Army in so many ways. The joint forces. In fact, I just had to submit what would you like as your next assignments? And I said a joint operations assignment. I love, my last deployment was to Afghanistan, and I worked with NATO. I was the deputy command chaplain for NATO, which is a very fancy title. But what I really liked about it was that we worked for the development of a chaplain corps within the Afghan Army. That was what our mission was. Our mission was to help the Afghan National Army, the ANA, to develop their own version of what would be called a chaplain corps. To take care of their soldiers, all of them Muslim of course, but to take care of their soldiers in the same way that we take care of ours. Now, what they don't have to deal with, that we do, is religious pluralism and the number of different religious faiths that you have to be cognizant of, at least an understanding the basic tenets of those faiths. But in their army, most everybody is Muslim, really. So we have to develop their chaplain corps based on those principles. So that was a great mission. That was a wonderful mission to be able to do that. And so, but we did it in a joint way. Army, Navy, Air Force, we were all involved. That was just what the chaplain section did. I mean, we were all involved with the development of different sectors of Afghanistan, from social to economic to military. We were all kind of, the mission was to help develop Afghanistan. They were using military expertise and personnel to do that. But I got to work with Army, Navy, and Air Force. And not only that, Army, Navy, Air Force of different countries. So yes, I worked with Canadian chaplains. Yes, indeed. And great men and women. Father Felix Roger. Remember him today. He and I got together and would say Mass in French. And he was from Quebec, Father Felix. But just got to know chaplains from the Italian Army, chaplains from the Spanish Army, and the Portuguese Army as well. They were all NATO, and they were all represented there in Afghanistan. So you get to make those connections with chaplains even from other countries. So I put that in as what I would like my next assignment to be. But when you get a priest back in your community, back as a civilian priest for you, these are the experiences that he has. These are the broadening life experiences that this man has now been able to develop and come back and bring that wealth of experience, expertise, and broad horizons back to your parishes. How can it not enrich the Church of the United States to send a young man to the chaplaincy? Let him have those types of experiences and then come back to be a priest that can minister in so many different profound ways to the men and women of his diocese. It's a beautiful blessing to be able to do what God has given me the great opportunity to do here. And I thank him each and every day for it. Is it hard? I quit 10 times a day in my head. I do. I finally just say, look, have it, but I know, kind of deep in my heart, I know this is where you call me. This is where I'm supposed to be. And it's no longer, I used to think it's something that I asked for, and I did. I did ask to do this. I went to the bishop, asked him to do it. He said yes, so I got here. But it's no longer that for me. I realized that even the inspiration there was God acting in my life. And what I do right now is because the Lord wants me to do it. So any difficulties, hardships, sufferings you have to endure as a result of it, and there are plenty, you offer them up like St. Paul did. You offer them up like those first martyrs of Rome did. You recognize that, hey, being a Christian and being a Catholic, it's not supposed to be easy. In fact, what it's supposed to be is finding a way to offer whatever sufferings, hardships, and difficulties the Lord may send your way, to offer them up to Christ in union with His sufferings for us. And when you can do that, you open your mind and your heart to deep, deep, deep joy. And so, even helping our service members who have to go through so much hardship and difficulty as fighting men and women, to help them come to that understanding of spirituality and their life as Christians, that becomes invaluable to them as individuals, as persons, and to them as Catholics as well. I think that's what the Lord wanted me to share with you today. I think that's the Thank you so much.
Sit down for a little while. Father Halladay would be more than happy to answer any questions at all. One of the questions that comes to my mind, I'm going to be
Is it on?
Sorry about that. One of the questions that comes to my mind is, how many of the soldiers coming back become priests?
So the military is the largest single supplier of vocations to the Church in the United States.
Yeah.
The largest single supplier of vocations to the Church in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them were service members, actually, serving themselves as military personnel. Many of them come as dependents of service members. They also come into the church as well. But we're the largest single supplier of vocations to the Church in the United States.
I'm from the Diocese of Wichita, Kansas, and we have had several priests go to the military.
Most notably, Father Emil Capon.
Yeah. But also, a couple of questions. Number one, how does the individual priest determine which branch they're going into? And also, do they have to go through boot camp?
So, I'll answer the second one first. No. We go through OCS, Officer Candidate School. So our chaplain, Officer Basic, is our version of boot camp. But it's not kind of like the boot camp that the enlisted guys go through.
Okay, I think some of our priests might be more likely to come.
But to answer your second question, or your first question, honestly, it's how the Lord is calling you. Growing up on the Gulf Coast, I initially thought about the Navy. I wanted to go, I thought the Navy chaplaincy. And that's where, yeah, I thought the Navy chaplaincy would be the place that I would like to serve. But when I heard the chaplain, when I was in the seminary, I heard the chaplain speak. So we had a vocations day where the chaplains came and talked about military chaplaincy. What I heard the Army chaplain reveal was, hey, we're the service with the least number of chaplains, the most shortage of chaplains, with respect to our numbers. And when I said that, I wasn't even thinking about actually joining the chaplaincy. It was really just to get a come and see. But I said, well, maybe I'll go there, since that's where they seem to need you guys the most. So a lot of times it's just how the Lord is leading you, and where you want to answer that call. Yes, ma'am.
So you don't feel comfortable wearing your collar, or they don't want you to wear your
So it's not part of the uniform? Yeah, you definitely have to wear the uniform. Now, in some militaries, and that was one of the great things I got to see working with other nations' militaries, their priests, particularly when you come from largely Catholic countries, right? So if you come from Spain or Portugal or places like that, they allow them to wear underneath their military uniform jacket their Roman collar. But that's not part of the uniform for the United States. So they don't let us wear it. Yeah, exactly. It would be, yeah.
But you do have a cross.
You have your cross.
Do we have our crosses? But and so the crosses, it depends on what type of chaplain you are. So all the Christian chaplains, regardless of your denomination, wear the crosses. The Jewish chaplains have tablets, the Ten Commandments, right? The Muslim chaplains have a half moon. And we even have some Buddhist chaplains have a Buddhist prayer group. So it depends on what your religious denomination is.
Father, that was going to be my question. I mean, when I saw you come in this morning, I go, boy, well, first of all, let me thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you do. Canadian and born after the Second World War. I really haven't known strife and war per se, so again, thank you so much for all you do. But when I saw you come in this morning, and that was going to be a question, here comes a guy who's pretty hard-edged, you know? and Bob said that, you know, he could cut his hand on your creases. And that's why I was going to ask if there was any flexibility. You are a wonderful man, but yeah, coming down the street, I'm going to myself, thank God he's there for me. But at the same time, too, I don't know if I want to tangle with him. So, thank you. That's really was going to be my question on the uniform. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for your service. I am also from Canada, and I have a young nephew who's in the Canadian military. So, thank God. I hope God will keep him safe as well. But my question to you is, has the military ever considered developing a diaconate program within the military to help the priests spread the word type of thing?
That's an interesting question, and I think in the Canadian military you do have that.
Yes, we do.
And in the French military they have the same type of program. We have thought about it within the Army, I can say for sure. I'm sure the Navy and Air Force have thought of this through as well. And we had thought about it in terms of bringing deacons in through as chief warrants, as warrant officers. That would be an interesting way to approach it. However, one of the problems that I think the Canadian military, and I know the French military, have experienced with respect to having deacons incorporated into their program, and these guys work as chaplains, really. We talked about it in terms of chaplain assistants, really, to the priest, with having deacons in. But there becomes a confusion in the minds of Catholics, particularly those who are only minimally catechized, as to who's the priest and who's the deacon and what roles are those really. So I think the Archdiocese of Military Services has held back on that largely as a way to say, hey, wait a second, we need to make sure that we don't confuse the roles of priest and deacon in the minds of the faithful by how we're administering this program of chaplaincy. So that's been the holdback for us. And I know that when I was in Afghanistan and I met the French chaplain after, Father Felix Roger was with the Canadians. There had been a French priest there. He had redeployed back to France, and then this new chaplain came out who was a deacon. But he came to me for the Eucharist because, of course, he couldn't say Mass. I mean, he couldn't do that. So I would, when I said Mass, I would put extra in the ciborium, and then I would give them to him so that he could be able to have Eucharist for his French soldiers. But it probably does. I'm sure he went off and had a communion service with the French soldiers, but it probably does bring a confusion in their minds as to what's his role. He's a chaplain, but then how do we distinguish priest from deacon when everybody wears that label? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. I told you before I retired, maybe. I just want to applaud you for your service. And I also would like the Serrans to understand that he said the largest source of vocations to the priesthood are military veterans. The Archdiocese for Military Services is undergoing a horrific shortage of funds. And I got an email last night from the AMS, Archbishop Berlioz, saying that Catholic Extension is ceasing their funding to the Archdiocese for Military Services. So I would highly recommend that you all please go online to the Archdiocese of Military Services, think about Father, make a donation. Thank you.
Thank you. So you don't really think about this, but at all of our military chapels, the collections that are taken up at our military chapels, they don't go to the AMS. They don't get a single penny from our military chapels. All of those funds, well, 30% of them, at least in the Army, that's the way they cut it, 30% of anything that's collected at a Catholic Mass goes to sustain soldier religious programming. Right? And that doesn't always mean Catholic religious programming for soldiers. That means whatever the installation chaplain's office, generally ran by a Protestant because that's what we have the most of, whatever an installation chaplain's office wants to put together in terms of soldier ministry and how they conceive of that, 30% of what we collect at military chapel goes to support that. The other 70% of what we collect at military chapel stays with the chapel, but we use that to pay a parish secretary. If we have to have a contracted priest to assist out, we usually use it to pay that. And then any of our Catholic soldier programming that goes on, we will pay for it out of that 70% that we collect. And the Archdiocese of Military Services only gets what we can give them in what's called a designated offering, and you can only do that 4 times a year. So yes, they do not receive the collections from the military chapel services. The only way they fund themselves is from donations from good men and women like yourselves. So thank you for that plug for AMS.
Let's just have 3 more questions, if that's okay.
Father, or Padre, I'm Canadian as well, and you mentioned about how there's a problem with chaplaincy, priest chaplaincy. But do you know, like, because you were involved with NATO, did you get any idea from other countries if they're having the same issue as the United States? Because it's like, I know in Canada, it's like I don't think we have a lot of Catholic priests as chaplains.
You're right.
But I'm wondering, like in other countries that have Catholic populations, if they do have if they have issues, and also is there a chaplaincy in most countries as well?
There is a chaplaincy in most countries for their military, yes. Most countries have a military chaplaincy. Interestingly enough, what happens, Canada is experiencing some of the same things that we're experiencing in the United States. In those more Catholic countries, they're able to administer their chaplaincies a little bit differently. So their chaplaincy program, particularly if they're very Catholic countries, is most identified with the church. It's very easy for them to be a priest and come into the chaplaincy. Whereas for the United States, the way that a priest has to come to the chaplaincy is a little bit different. So their bishops are actually officers. They're military officers in those Catholic countries. Our Archbishop is not a military officer. He has the honorary rank of a 4-star general, but he's not a military officer, it's just an honorary rank. Whereas in those very Catholic countries like Italy, Portugal, Spain, their bishops are actually officers of the military. So they can ordain for themselves, they can do a whole program where they cultivate their own vocations, unlike what we're able to do, or Canada is able to do right now. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm from the U.S. I wanted to find out a little bit about, you had begun or was involved with the SERRA Club at a military base?
Yes.
I'm from Colorado Springs, and we're like highly military.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a SERRA Club, so we like.
I encourage every effort to do that. So this is what happened. Fort Leonard Wood, my second assignment in the Army, after Fort Campbell, after the 101st. We had a great, robust, and they still do have a great, robust Knights of Columbus program at Fort Leonard Wood. Fort Leonard Wood is a training post, so you have soldiers that are coming there learning how to be MPs, learning how to be chem soldiers, learning how to be truck drivers for the Army. So a lot of education and training going on at Fort Leonard Wood. And so a lot of very young people, young enlisted guys that are coming in. I have 1,000 soldiers at Mass every Sunday. 1,000 soldiers. Look, communion went on forever. And I could not complain. I let my arm get worn out because it was a great thing to be able to do communion to that many soldiers. But I saw the need to ask the Knights of Columbus, hey, I know we write a check, and we have some little things that we do to support vocations, but we really need something that concentrates on vocations. Knights of Columbus, you did so many other things for the community, the Catholic community. I said, I need a group that is my sniper rifle. I need a group that targets just vocation and vocation promotion. And so they got it. They immediately got it. Father, absolutely. So that's, of course, my connection with the Serrans. I said, we need to start a SERRA group. And so we did. Now, I had a guy who's still a great friend of mine, Jim Barrett. He was the retired regimental command sergeant major. Those of you who are in the military probably know what that means. He was the retired regimental command sergeant major for the MP Corps. Yep. And he put it together. He was the inspiration behind it. He got people together. He made it happen. And with his help, we got the first military SERRA Club instituted at Fort Gordon to take care of concentrating solely on the promotion, cultivation of vocations from that single source of vocations for the Church of the United States of America. That's what we did. So I encourage that effort. If you can find some movers and shakers at Fort Carson or any of those other military posts that are out there by you, absolutely.
I'm not from Canada. So my challenge is, if so many vocations come from the military source, what can be done where you can have your own seminarians? Is it just financial? Or
very good question. Well, part of it is financial, but that's not really the biggest part of it, I think. I think one of the things is really diplomatic more than anything else. So the Archdiocese of Military Services does not want to take away vocations from the civilian dioceses, right? So we don't want to kind of steal those vocations from the civilian dioceses. But that's why we have the co-sponsorship program, as a way to kind of say, okay, let's share out these vocations that we're sending to you. Honestly, this is something I've prayed a lot about. I've actually put together a rule of life on this. If anybody would ever like a copy of it, I can send it to you. I've sent it to the Archbishop of Military Services. He's not really, I don't think he's ready to consider something like this. But I think, quite honestly, we need a religious order whose charism is military chaplaincy. The reason I say that is that it would serve two purposes. Because one of the things that we do lack is formation as a military officer. And as the military, particularly the Army, as it has increased in this understanding of military professionalism, what has happened is that the officership has become much more of a central focus. And look, I was a Peace Corps volunteer before I went to the seminary. I did not have any kind of background in officership. And in the seminary, you certainly don't get any understanding of military officership. So I came to the Army certainly as a desire to care for our military men and women, but not with very, very green. So maybe the Army was the right place for me to go. But very, very green in terms of my understanding of officership. What a military religious order would do is it would allow priests to be formed both in officership through something like the ROTC, which would pay for their seminary, and they would also allow them to be formed, of course, in priestly vocation by going to a seminary that offers ROTC. So, going to Catholic University of America, going to Mount St. Mary's, going to Georgetown. These places have ROTC programs, but they also have seminary formation. Fordham is another place. Their seminary formation is for Jesuits, but nevertheless, nothing gets that. I'm Jesuit formed. I love the Jesuits. I wouldn't want to study theology from them, but I'll take philosophy. But yeah, so I think that's an avenue for us. But we have to explore it, and the diocese just has to be willing and ready to explore it. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Father Paul, I'll be brief. I just wanted to give you and the rest of the group here a small testimonial. We have a Catholic priest in Omaha, Nebraska, who served as a Marine during World War II. And as he was coming down the ropes, getting into the boats that would take him to Iwo Jima. He was on the 6th wave of Marines of Iwo Jima. As he's crawling down those ropes, he said to God, if you see fit that I make it off of this island alive, I will serve you for the rest of my life. Everyone in his company, except him and another Marine, were killed on Iwo Jima. He's now 93 years old. He spent the last 20 years of his active service as a chaplain at the VA hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, and he was awarded Monsignorship by the military, I'm not sure what it's called, but the military Archdiocese, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
Absolutely. And I tell you, there's so many powerful, moving stories of men who have been in very trying circumstances, situations, and they become priests. They become priests. Hey, I told you I had one last story for you about sisters, about religious sisters in the military. Here it is, and I'll leave you with this. It's a great story. It's about a sister by the name of Sister Deidre Burns. D.D. Burns. Little Sisters of the Precious Blood of Jesus. Now, Sister Dee, before she was Sister Dee, was Dr. Dee Burns. She was a surgeon and a lieutenant colonel in the Army. She does her service in the Army, great surgeon. She gets out of the Army because of a vocation to religious life. She goes and she joins the Little Sisters of the Precious Blood of Jesus in Washington, D.C., a cloistered order, and she has taken up the habit to fully profess sister. However, there is this little caveat in the military that for 8 years after you leave, they can still call you back. It was not 8 years after Dr. Dee Burns left the Army and became Sister Dee Burns. She received a call, and they said, we're looking for Dr. Deidre Burns. She says, well, my name is Sister Deidre Burns. And he says, are you the same person as Dr. Deidre? I used to be Dr. Deidre Burns. He says, ma'am, we're recalling you back to active duty military service. We need surgeons in Iraq. She said, well, you don't understand. I've joined a religious order. I live in a convent now. And there's a pause on the phone. She says, and then the gentleman said, ma'am, we don't care what you're doing right now. We just say what we need you to do in 6 months. Sister Dee Burns went to her mother superior. She said, hey, you know, if it's the Army, and these are the rules, and this is what you have to do. She left the convent, went out to Iraq, performed her duties as a surgeon, and was issued a 9mm pistol. She had a problem with that, of course, so she went to her commanding officer, she said, who was Catholic, by the way, and she said, sir, she goes, I'm comfortable having to carry around this 9mm pistol. By the way, you have to carry it. So these are the regulations. You have to carry your weapon with you. You can get in trouble for not having it. She said, I just have a problem carrying this 9mm pistol with me everywhere I go. She said, I'm a religious sister. I'm a nun in a convent. And the commander stopped for a moment and he goes, sister, you take that weapon and put it in the arms room, and I don't want to see it on your side again. She took it, put it in the arms room. She never had to wear it again after that. But that was Sister Deidre Burns coming to the Army, or Dr. Deidre Burns becoming Sister Deidre Burns and coming back to the Army as a nun. I don't know if that's the way to do this. If we could have sisters in the military, I know it would be a great witness for our country. Amen. Thank you very much. God bless you.
One of the things that they do in the military that I learned a long time ago is you always salute your superior officers. So what I'd like to do is to bring up Father Halladay's parents so that we can salute them. Come on up.
A picture behind me right here of me in the center looking far younger and probably less aggressive than I do now. This was taken back in my first year in the seminary in Rome. My dad brought it here. I was a little kind of embarrassed by it. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, what's that doing up there? Dad brought that picture. She goes, well, tell him to take it down. I knew you wouldn't like it. I said, look, whenever you have your picture taken with a saint, don't get rid of it.
Is now at West Point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to take a break for lunch.